Hello, and welcome to the course of U.S. history. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time we were together, we looked at the voyage of Christopher Columbus, specifically here, the first voyage, and just up to that point of exploration. Today, we're going to be digging a little bit more into Columbus's full role in the exploration of the Americas. So let's get to it. First of all, the Voyage of Columbus. It was in 1492 that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, that is, on his first American voyage. He will take 4 of them in total. And it was on this voyage that he was the first European to cross the Atlantic Ocean in almost 500 years. This gentleman down here, Leif Erikson, was, of course, the first, and it's important within Viking Scandinavian history that we recognize that, but of course in the history of the world it tends to be that one just didn't matter that much. Now, these voyages by the Spanish were done for the purpose of finding wealth, and they will find wealth in the New World. And we'll be talking about what they did find and what they didn't find throughout this episode. Now, Columbus is first and foremost interested in gold. Gold is the easiest wealth to transport back. And he does find it in some of the jewelry of the natives. The Taino, the group that he found on San Salvador, had gold jewelry on them. And Columbus was, of course, very interested in this very early on. And so he takes some Taino guides with him because they had talked of other lands in the area and that the gold itself didn't come from their island. It came from somewhere else, and they had traded for it. Now, Columbus hears about this, and he hears about a larger island in the area, and he believes that Cipangu must be around, because remember, Columbus believes he's in the Indies. He doesn't know that he's in the Caribbean. And so he goes off to look for Cipangu, and he finds that large island, the island that those Taino had spoken of. But instead, he's found Cuba. Now, on Cuba, the Spanish are going to learn about tobacco for the first time. Tobacco is going to be very important to the history of the region and to what will be the United States later on. Tobacco didn't exist in Europe. It was something that they had never seen before, but they saw it as an interesting thing, something that they might trade for or get access to and take back to Europe. And that's exactly what the Spanish do. They do introduce tobacco to the Europeans and begin to cultivate it for this purpose in their colonies. Now, Hispaniola, where Columbus goes after Cuba, is going to wind up being more important to the story of Columbus himself. Now, he'd left Cuba trying to find the Asian mainland, and he lands in Hispaniola, and there he does find the source of the region's gold. Hispaniola didn't have a tremendous amount of gold, but it did have gold, and the native populations there knew where to find it, and how to extract it. And so Columbus is able to get a little bit more gold on the island of Hispaniola. Now, an unfortunate thing happens for Columbus, but it winds up being something that he'll use going forward, and that is that he has a shipwreck. On Christmas Day in 1492, the Santa Maria, the largest of his ships, is shipwrecked. And it would take a long time to sit and repair that ship, and they decide instead they're going to go ahead and leave some men behind and have a permanent presence on Hispaniola from this point forward. So they disassemble the ship, they use those parts to create Fort Navidad, a very simple fort that is left behind in Hispaniola. Now, the story of this fort, I'm not going to get into in detail, but when Columbus does eventually return, this fort is gone, and his people have been wiped out. And there's a lot of speculation as to why, but it appears that they and the natives didn't get along all that well. And it was probably the Spanish who had instigated some sort of a fight. And as you can tell by this picture, which is, of course, not an actual picture of that fort, but the Spanish didn't really have a large presence there. And so they were wiped out. Now, after 3 months of sailing around the Caribbean and learning a little bit about what was there, Columbus does return to Spain. And the Spanish are very happy to see him. I'm sure no small number of them, looking at the same math the Portuguese had looked at, had expected to never see Columbus again. But here he is. He's back and successful in their mind. He also brings back some gold jewelry, some of that Taino jewelry, to show the king and the queen that there is, in fact, gold in this land that he discovered. He also brings back 6 Taino slaves. He had taken 10, 4 had died on the voyage. But he takes back 6 Taino slaves. These are the ones who had once helped serve him as guides, but he has now enslaved them and brought them back to Spain as examples of the people that they had found, the Indians, as he will call them. Now, the Spanish king and queen are somewhat interested in the Indians, but mostly they're interested in that gold. This was the purpose of their voyage, to get this sort of wealth. And when they start to think about, what is really valuable here, it's the gold that they would like to have. So Columbus is sent back, and on his second voyage, he is going to build a more permanent Spanish establishment in Hispaniola. This again is the island of Hispaniola down here. It's where he's going to focus most of his attention for his second voyage. And he actually creates a couple of new settlements, Isabela and Santo Domingo. Now, Santo Domingo is going to be the first permanent European colony in the New World. Isabela won't last, Santo Domingo will. And it becomes a Spanish stronghold, a gateway to the New World for the Spanish. And it will be Columbus and his brother, Bartholomew, who lead this colony for its first 4 years. That was part of the arrangement that Columbus had with the Spanish, is that he would be in charge of all the lands that he had found and get a substantial portion of the wealth from it. The thing, though, is that he doesn't get a whole lot of wealth from these new colonies. A lot of that is mismanagement, and a lot of that is just not as wealthy as they had thought. And it's this lack of profit, as well as other factors, that are going to lead to some serious problems for Columbus. No money, no problems. But apart from that, he was also really ineffective. He was very much disliked by the natives. He had to deal with constant rebellion because he was incredibly cruel and brutal to the native populations. So much so that the Spanish really take notice of this, and Columbus himself is arrested on his third voyage and sent to prison in Spain. They'll release him. He'll go on a fourth, but that's also not very successful. And in 1506, Columbus is going to die. He's going to die, and he's going to die poor. He has not managed to get a lot of wealth out of the Americas. And additionally, he dies before it's widely known that this is not the East Indies. He has not sailed to Asia. He has sailed to 2 entirely new continents, but this is entirely unknown to Columbus even at the time of his death. Columbus did not know that he had discovered the Americas. That honor is going to go to this man, Amerigo Vespucci, another Italian sailor, and the Spanish are able to hire him, and he's going to go lead a number of expeditions to the New World. You can see on this map down here his 2 most famous in 1499 and 1501, 1502. Those are the 2 famous voyages of Amerigo Vespucci. Now, Vespucci is going to be the first to realize that Spain had discovered an unknown land, that this was not Asia, this was something else. And so they start to reconsider what the world might look like, that this is Asia. Over here, to the west of Europe, that is something else. The world looks different than they had thought it did. And in 1507, the year after Columbus's death, you start to see maps appearing of the world that recognize these new continents, and they name them after the explorer whose knowledge of the region had really reshaped European knowledge of the world. They name it after him, and they name these new continents the Americas, after Amerigo Vespucci. Next time we get together, we are going to be talking about European claims in America, because once other European powers realize that this is a large, unknown continent with unknown wealth and a potential for tremendous exploitation. The Spanish, French, and English are all going to jump right on board and start to make some large land claims. We'll be looking at that next time. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me, and farewell.